how's it going? Welcome to NoDQ&A video here on NoDQ.com and the YouTube channel youtube.com/AaronRiftNoDQ. Before I get started, I would like to give a very special shout out to Adrian, who left a very generous super chat during the YouTube premiere of the last video. He is the current, reigning, and defending NoDQ Super Chat Champion. Now for this video, in the YouTube premiere, if you leave the single biggest Super Chat donation, you will be the next NoDQ Super Chat Champion. With that being said, let's get down to your questions. This question comes from the Anime Fans. He says, I've heard something about WWE going back to the Attitude Era. What's going on? Doesn't even matter for a person who stopped caring for WWE outside of the merch since the first Saudi Arabia show. This is a running joke on NoDQ.com. Is the Attitude Era coming back? I've been asked that question so many times now. I know there are some people that still follow my channel that have not watched WWE and have not been keeping up to speed with the product. So I feel like every now and then I'll give an answer to the question. No, the Attitude Era is not coming back. If you saw Raw on Monday, there was the Raw Underground segment. We had some women dancing around. We had machismo with guys doing MMA style fighting. But that is WWE's effort to try and bring in younger viewers. Now, is WWE going to take things a step further? Probably not. WWE is still a PG company, and yes, WWE has pushed the envelope at times. You had that storyline with Rusev and Lana, the love triangle with Bobby Lashley getting involved, and we've seen wrestlers use profanity. We had Rey Mysterio get his eye popped out of socket on pay-per-view. WWE has done some edgy things, but they're not going to go back to the Attitude Era. They have too much on the line when it comes to the television deals and sponsorships. It's just not going to happen. So as much as we look fondly upon the Attitude Era, and sometimes that might not really be the right way to look at the Attitude Era, because the Attitude Era had a lot of creativity, but it also had a lot of things that did not work. There were some very cringy segments, and with the political climate of 2020 also, there's no way. There's no way WWE would even be able to get away with it. The stuff that they did back in the Attitude Era today. Even half of the stuff that WWE did, it would not fly in 2020. You're not going to have Bret Hart or somebody like Bret Hart in 2020 go on television and refer to his opponent as a homo. It just ain't going to happen. And those were the edgy things that we saw during the Attitude Era, the shock TV to try and get a reaction out of somebody, the Jerry Springer aspect to it. That's done. That was a product of the 90s, and I think for WWE to gain new viewers in the long run, they're gonna need to come up with something completely different. This question comes from Adam. Do you think it's time for the WWE Championship bout and the Women's Championships to have a new makeover, perhaps something with more detail other than the WWE logo behind a blank background? I've never been a big belt person. It's not something that I put that much time and investment into, but I do think it's a bit lazy to have basically the same design for 4 of your championships, the men's world titles and the women's world titles. I'd like to see things change up, have each championship with its own unique design. I'm all for it, and I think WWE should do it. I mean, there's probably money to be made with it. You have different championship designs, you come up with something new. Hey, that's more replicas you're going to sell. I like it, but maybe WWE just wants to keep things simple with the title designs and not do too much. I still argue, and I say this a lot, merging the titles. And then if you ever did that, I would definitely do a new design for the men's championship and the women's championship. And, you know, the way they have it now, basically for Raw, it's red. And then the SmackDown championship is blue. And other than that, it's really the same thing. But yeah, I would like to see an overhaul with those titles. But then again, if they don't do it, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I have this question from Rollins versus Styles again, please. He says, would you like to have seen a third singles match between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels at a WrestleMania? If so, when? I think what those two did at WrestleMania 25 and WrestleMania 26 was enough. I don't think you needed to do a third match, and maybe you could have done another Hell in a Cell. But then again, the first Hell in a Cell back in 97 was one of the all-time great matches in WWE history. So I'm sure The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels would have been able to do something great with that. But I think what they did was fine. They upped the ante for the second year with the retirement stipulation. I'm trying to think if there's any other stipulation they could have done other than career on the line, career versus streak. But I think what they did was great, and I would not mess with that and add a third match. This question comes from TJS. What are your thoughts on wrestlers that are signed to major promotions appearing on indie shows? For example, Jon Moxley is the AEW World Champion and the IWGP US Champion. Does this make AEW feel less important to you since you can tune into other shows to see him? Less exclusive? It doesn't really bother me. I think it's fine to have AEW stars appear in Japan, and if anything, that gives them more exposure. It gives AEW more exposure in Japan. It helps Japan. It's win-win for everybody, and it makes somebody like Jon Moxley even more of a global superstar when he's winning titles everywhere, whether it's the United States or Japan or United Kingdom or Mexico. Like, let them work for other promotions. I think most US fans will focus on AEW, and obviously there is some overlap. There are people that watch New Japan and AEW, but those people are also going to be your most hardcore fans, and it's not really going to bother them. As far as, like, from a casual fan perspective, yeah, they might want to see that one guy exclusive, but they're also at the same time not really paying attention to what's going on in other parts of the world, hence they're casual fans. So to me, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really make a difference. This one comes from Eric Cruz. When do you think we'll start seeing stars from NXT UK make the jump to the main roster, and who do you want to see make the jump? I do not see any NXT UK stars going to the main roster in the near future because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think the focal point, once we start having events with fans again, I think WWE will focus on the guys that are in the United States version of NXT that the company has been building up, the Keith Lees and the Dominic Dijakovics. Those guys are going to be the main ones. NXT UK, I don't think is going to be high on the priority list. Now, there are a few guys, and Ridge Holland is one of those guys who recently debuted in the United States version of NXT. And I could see somebody like Pete Dunne eventually going to the main roster. I'd like to see Tyler Bate on the main roster. I just don't know if he'll get much of a push because he's not the biggest guy. But then again, Rey Mysterio is not the biggest guy, and he became a huge deal. I think Tyler Bate would be a great addition to the main roster. But we'll see. If it does happen with those guys, I don't think it's going to happen for at least another year, maybe even longer than that. This question comes from Jonathan Aaron. Since Raw and SmackDown are having record low ratings, would you say wrestling is now worse than in 95? Should we call this WWE the failed era? And what major shakeup would you do to create a buzz and increase ratings? I say this a lot whenever somebody says this is the worst year in WWE history. I don't think it's worse than 93 or 95 because at least now you have a very talented roster. Of course, WWE doesn't know what to do with a lot of those guys, but the match quality is way better. Now, you could argue in 93 and 95 you had better storylines, and I agree with that to some degree, but not a lot. 93, 95 creatively was not a great period, and plus you did not have the quality of wrestling. Really, you had a few guys like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart during that period that carried the company, but beyond that, there wasn't a whole lot to get excited about. So I would still say 2020 WWE is probably more watchable overall than 93 and 95, but if things keep going downhill, maybe we'll see a year where it's truly worse. But I cannot see how it can get any worse unless a bunch of guys end up leaving the company, but we know WWE locks them into contracts, and there's so many people on their contract. They got all these people in NXT. I just don't see that happening. This question comes from Mr. Christopher Yuck. Have you followed up watching more Impact Wrestling since Slammiversary? Any thoughts on their current product? I have watched some of the Impact Wrestling episodes since Slammiversary, and it's fine. It's just hard to really get invested when, first of all, you have no fans, no audience members, nothing. And they have Josh Matthews on commentary, and I'm not a fan of Josh Matthews on commentary. It's really hard to get into him as the voice of Impact Wrestling, and I associate him with the lowest period of the company too. But there have been a few shining lights, and I think that Eric Young has done very well. I thought that was a really good angle where you had Rich Swann announce his retirement due to the attack from Eric Young, and then as he's leaving, Eric Young blasts him from behind and then uses the crutch on him. That was fantastic, and that seems like a nice build for Slammiversary's follow-up, which is Bound for Glory, coming up in October, or is it September? Coming up pretty soon as we get into the fall. And then you have EC3, who I suspect will be going for the Impact World title. You got probably a tag team title match between Anderson and Gallows and the Motor City Machine Guns. We'll see what happens with Heath Slater. He did not win his way into Impact. But there are some matchups and storylines being built up, and there seems like there's a direction for the first time in a while with a lot of different people and something to tune in for. It's been okay, but between Raw, SmackDown, NXT, AEW, it's just hard for me to really invest my time and really get into what's going on in Impact. But maybe they'll be able to have a small crowd at Bound for Glory, and they can continue to slowly build up some momentum again and become a player in the industry. But it's going to be tough, I think. Even with these additions, it's going to be an uphill battle. I have this question from Sun Goshiku. Per their friendship, Alexa Bliss gave up her heel ways, Nikki Cross stopped being out of control and showed more personality. As friendships in life can change us for the better sometimes, would you agree that their character development from 2019 to 2020 was relatable in that sense? Yeah, for sure. I think that in real life, people can bring out the best in each other and sometimes bring out the worst in each other. Alexa and Nikki was a positive story, and to me, it definitely felt realistic. The two of them had chemistry, and I think that they each influenced each other to be better in their own way. As you mentioned, Alexa wasn't so much of a jerk, and Nikki Cross kind of calmed down and became more normal. And we've also seen the negative side of it, like when The Fiend drove Seth Rollins crazy to the point where Rollins became the Monday Night Messiah. I would definitely like to see more storylines like this and more interactions with characters and more development with the characters and their relationships instead of it all just being so one-dimensional. I'd like to see the layers, but that also requires some quality writing and long-term storytelling, and not sure if WWE really has either at this point. But yeah, it would be nice to definitely take real-life relationships and see how those develop and implement those relationships into storylines on television. That will wrap things up for this edition of No DQ&A video. Thank you all so much for tuning in as always. I appreciate your viewership and continued support of NoDQ.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share a link to it on social media. And I will see you guys next time for episode number 1150 of No DQ&A video. Take care, everybody. Stay positive and be safe.